Alright, so this video is going to be a lot less scripted and more off the cuff and, I suppose, rambling than my other videos. So I've been thinking about, like, the SystemD question and how to respond to it. And the thing with SystemD is that it gets a lot of hate, some deserved, and a lot that it doesn't. So, full disclaimer, I don't really mind SystemD, although right now on all my systems, I think I only have SystemD on one, but that's not because of a lack of, say, tolerance for SystemD. My preference, I like run it more. Run it's very simple and easy to understand. I can script everything. It's like, I hate to use this term, but sysvinit plus. Like, sysvinit was like a complete piece of garbage. But run it is actually pretty nice. In fact, I use run it on my server. Some weird interaction with systemd for some reason on that hardware causes it to hard lock, and the only solution I found is to use a distro that doesn't use systemd. So I have a server running Void Linux, however that came to be, and yeah, here we are. But the thing with systemd is that I hear a lot of criticism about it, um, like how it's bloated or it's, say, an NSA backdoor or whatever it need be, depending on whoever's complaining. And let me just pull up my HTOP here, just to give you something to look at while I talk. And you can see here this systemd based distro. This is Debian, I believe, unstable in the VM, and it's only using 157 megs of RAM. So to say something is bloated, it would have to be using a lot more than just that. Now, I know people say that, but I know that performance is not a reason why, because I don't see anyone saying systemd is slow. It's not the fastest compared to, say, run it, but it's still definitely not slow. And I feel the reason why people say systemd is bloated is because they say it does a lot of stuff. Yeah, systemctl, you got time date control, you got what? God, system journal D, system resolve D, whatever. And I think the answer to if I think this is bloated is more complicated than a simple yes or no, hence why I'm making a video on it rather than just a reply to a comment. And I think the reason is, I think the thing people need to understand is that system initialization is a lot more complicated than it used to be. Now, let me explain. Back in the day, and older Linux users know what I'm talking about, but the newer ones don't. They don't know what life was like before we had all these choices of init systems, even though all distros only support one nowadays. None of them know anything besides a systemd dominated landscape. But before that, we had something called sysvinit. And sysvinit was not good. It's been a long time since I used it, but I remember it was basically like just firing off and forking the background all these processes with these scripts made by your distro and hoping they worked, without many ways to really like keep track of it after it's fired off. I think you could stop it and you could start it, but like monitoring and logging things were all based on your distribution's own, for lack of a better word, proprietary scripts. They were open source and all that stuff, free software, but they were basically a distro. And there was OpenRC later down the line, but systemd came out, and the reason people use systemd was because, compared to sysvinit, it's not even a comparison. It's infinitely better. If you compare a sysvinit script to like a systemd like service, it's not even like close how much easier it is for a systemd service. And the problem's only gotten worse, I think, as time went on, because now we have. Okay, so back in the day, you'd launch Service 1, then Service 2, then Service 3 in synchronous order, one after another. Well, now we have multiple threads and multiple CPUs and 16 gigs of RAM, and we can do better than that. So you can use sysvinit in these days, but you're going to be requiring one service after another every time, in the right order, as you boot up. Meanwhile, systemd can check which service depends on what, and it'll like it'll run them in the right order as efficiently as possible, and it handles all that. Now, I'm not going to deny that SystemD is not a big project, but I think if you're running a server, I think that if you have the choice, you should use SystemD because initialization is, in all honesty, a very complicated subject, and sometimes a complicated subject needs a complicated solution. And web browsers, the W3 standard these days is really bloated as well. We have JavaScript and PHP and CSS and all these different forms and standards of HTML got to comply to. Well, no one's gonna say, "Hey, I should only use Surf or like some minimalist garbage browser that could hardly render any pages." No, what you gotta say is, well, someone might say that, but no sane person will say that. But the solution isn't to make a less, is to sacrifice all the features we have in the modern web. It's to find a solution that doesn't feel complicated to navigate a complicated problem. And so that's why we use Firefox or Brave or Chromium or whatever. It's because it it's probably a very complex program, but it doesn't matter if the program itself is complicated. It matters if it feels complicated, and that's why I get to SystemD. SystemD gives us the most features of any init system. Like I don't think anyone's gonna argue with me on that point. But the thing is, these features are useful if you're like me, you run a server. I wish my server downstairs could run SystemD, but it can't because of some weird bug. Now, it's probably knocking at SystemD its own right. I don't disagree with you, but I think it's something to do. I need to RMA that CPU, but it's way past the date I can do that. I don't know. But yeah, that's my opinion on SystemD. I think it's a complicated solution to a complicated problem. And that, I guess, brings me to my next point, where oh, I like to say I like Runit as my favorite init system overall because again it's super simple. But I can recognize how if I had a server, I'm not going to use Runit of a choice because all those features in SystemD I use like 90% of them, at least for the services. Like it's crazy useful. OpenRC I tried. I couldn't. I It was okay, but I like Runit more. But I'll admit if I had to I'll admit even that's better for servers because of how it does dependencies and stuff like that. But anyways, so on to pottering. I think pottering is many words, and all those words are gigantic asshole. So he's very flippant when it comes to certain issues in SystemD and stuff like that. And I think he's not a very good member of the community. Now that being said, I don't think I think what he's contributed overall to Linux project is significant because he's also given us Pulse Audio, and if you use Alsa's not very good still. It's really just not. But much like SystemD, and SystemD has a problem when it first came out. And I remember that is that when it first came out, these very complicated projects, the distro maintainers did not know how to use these things properly, didn't know how to configure them properly. Hence the meme like Pulse no audio, whatever, right? So when upstream, the distro maintainers like, all right, oh, I got hiccups. Yeah. Excuse me. So when distro maintainers upstream are like, hey, we're gonna swap to Pulse Audio or SystemD, and all this potteringware, noun, software that's very useful but also extremely over-engineered. Potteringware. SystemD and Pulse Audio are potteringware. Anyways, so when Pulse Audio came out, SystemD came out, these maintainers didn't know how to use them. So you would like you'd boot up your machine one day, upgrading from Debian whatever to whatever, and lo and behold, you have SystemD in your system, and you shut down your PC, waiting for stop job 1 out of 27, 4 seconds go by, and it's a pain in the ass. And same with audio, like you have your audio works one day, next day you open up your computer and it says dummy output and nothing works. So I guess in conclusion, I think Pottering is an asshole, but he's given us some very useful stuff over the years. I'm not sure if Network Manager is his doing as well, but I actually love Network Manager, even though I only use like single user systems. If I were to have multiple users, I use Conman because you can set up like each profile for a user, but that's sort of another day. But yeah, SystemD, you know, It's alright. I think it's too much hate for what it is. Although I do wish more distros would diversify from it. Like, even just like SystemD or Run It on most distros, I think would be a fine, or not Run It, SystemD and OpenRC would be a fine compromise for most distros. I wish Debian would support OpenRC officially because I think that's like only fair. Probably use OpenRC on my desktop systems, but yeah. So, long story short, Pottering does not deserve death threats for SystemD. He deserves it for Pulse Audio.